Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Cox. I'm a member of the Net Capital team. Let's allow 1 minute for everybody to settle in. Thanks. Okie dokie. Let's go ahead and dive on in. So welcome again, everybody. Today, I'm excited to welcome Bill Paske with RedOak Instruments. As always, this company is actively raising capital on the Net Capital platform. I have added a link to that in chat, but you can also go directly to netcapital.com and search RedOak, or you can go to netcapital.com/companies/RedOak-instruments. As you know, a few quick housekeeping items. Please do use the Q&A feature built into Zoom. I know that there's also a chat functionality, but Q&A really makes it so much easier to track all those questions and make sure that we get to as many of them as possible. And please do ask as many questions as you'd like. We want to keep this as interactive as possible. So with all that being said, please join me in welcoming RedOak to the stage. Come on in, Bill. Tell us a little bit about what you're working on at RedOak Instruments, please.
Okay, we are a sports medical technology company that non-invasively measures fine motor degradation, looking to find injury, presence of injury, to be able to document injury so that sports trainers, coaches, EMTs, medical practitioners, anyone's associated with teams can actually determine if an injury is present and document the severity of the injury, but more importantly, document when you can return to play without further injury.
Oh, no, I think that's super, super exciting. And I know you have a strong team alongside you, Bill. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into building RedOak Instruments, and then some of the team that are supporting you in building it out?
Yeah, my background is not in any of the fields here. I'm a physicist by training, and got out of the oil industry when they were purging everyone about every 6 weeks. So I decided to try something else. My wife is a physician, and so I got interested in medical instrumentations and helping her in what she was doing. And I had a neighbor across the street who was a neurologist who asked me, how would you measure the symptoms of carpal tunnel syndrome? And in the process of doing that, I started looking at how would you make those measurements? And that was quite a while ago. And since then, we have made 3 or 4 prototypes, tested it in many clinics, tested it in with chiropractors, acupuncturists, general practitioners, orthopedic surgeons, neurologists, one neuropsychologist, in general, just trying to find out what we can and cannot do with the equipment. So even though I'm a physicist, I now look at myself more as developing medical research equipment. And to help me on this, we've got Rick Bellman, who's our CEO and president. He's a lawyer, and so people like having lawyers for CEOs. They don't like having scientists for CEOs. So we've got Rick Bellman. He's actually has a background with GE Medical in sales and acquisitions, so he actually knows what he's doing. He can help with the licensing, the FDA that we need to do, the multi-state compliances, all the goody stuff that I really don't understand, and what's more, don't want to. I've got a great deal of help actually from my son, David Paske, who is a BSME. He helps us with the prototype development. We've got a 3D printer where we make stuff up to try to figure out what works and what doesn't work. He's redesigned our hardware for us so that we can make it at about 1/10 of the cost that I was building it. So clearly having an engineer who knows what he's doing is useful. And on top of that, we have David Highnote, just to make it confusing with two Davids. David Highnote is a computer science guy, and he does our software development for us, our remote servers, and basically tries to keep everything running in spite of what Windows OS is doing at the moment.
No, that's a fantastic team that you've assembled there, Bill. And I know you have a handful of advisors that also are critical to your development. Can you tell us a little bit about Ronald and Elizabeth and them?
Yes. Ron Swatsina is a neuropsychologist who is very interested in ADHD and developmental psychology. He also has had several concussions during his youth in football and as a fireman, and then later on in the military. So he's very interested in what happens when you have a head injury and then how you can detect and resolve this. So in his research at the Brain Injury Institute here in Texas, he and I were presenting papers on several different occasions and got to know each other. So we're now pretty good friends. And he helps me to make sure I'm staying on path. Elizabeth Smith is a business psychologist, PhD, who has helped me learn how to apply what we're doing to businesses in itself. She also developed the Community Medical Foundation for Patient Safety Foundation. And she's been helping me research the equipment that we're doing and figuring out its applicability. So she's been a great deal of help to us as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A strong team. And it sounds like you have a really kind of thoughtful approach to how you're building out that team. Can we take a step back for a moment and go to 30,000 feet? How, what exactly is the problem, and how big is the problem of detecting and documenting injuries?
It's actually more difficult than you would think. To give you a rough idea, most people think a concussion is real easy to figure out. Well, roughly 400,000 people a year go into and out of a hospital without a diagnosis because they cannot detect the symptoms that are present for that individual. Sometimes these symptoms show up right away. Sometimes they take a month or two to show up. Fortunately for us, we've been able to detect them within 30 minutes of a concussion. And I say within 30 minutes, that's as close as I've gotten to someone after they've hit their head. I don't know that we can see it closer or not. But basically what we do is we measure how clumsy you are. And if you just stop and think, when you see some guy get his head hit really hard out on a football field or on a basketball court, he staggers off the field. Okay, that staggering is because he's lost control of his motor system. Well, what we look at are the fine motor controls of your hand. So when you hit your head and you start losing control of your coordination, I start looking for your fine motor control in your hand immediately. And what we're finding is that there are some rather interesting patterns that develop that would actually differentiate a head injury from some of the other injuries that we've seen. And so basically what I wanted to do initially was to just be able to document injury, until I realized that by looking at the patterns of the measurements that we make, we actually can diagnose. We know which side of the head you get hit on by looking at these patterns, and because we measure both the left and the right hands. So it turns out to be a far better way of making the measurement than we realized, but we're making using a method that no one in the medical community uses. And so that's one of the reasons we've taken so long to get this going, is by doing a lot of research, going to brain injury conventions, doing presentations, trying to get the medical community to look at the way we're making the measurements, trying to get their attention. But basically what we want to do from a large area is just to be able to say you are injured or you are not injured, the rehab is working or it's not working, and then to be able to document it so that you don't wind up a month after the fact and people saying, well, gee, we didn't know you were injured. Our equipment says you were or you weren't.
Yeah, no, it's so important. And I do think that there's kind of a heightened awareness around this issue, the issue of traumatic brain injury. around some of the kind of concussion protocols, and sports are evolving to try to decrease the likelihood of those concussive blows. And I know from the data, it looks like from 2006, 2014, the number of TBI, traumatic brain injury related emergency department visits, hospitalizations, and deaths have increased by 53%. This is a growing issue.
Oh, it is. And by 2020, last year, it was supposed to be the leading cause of death in young kids between 15 and 20.
Wow, that is tragic. That is tragic. And then I think I got a good grasp of the problem. Tell me a little bit about how RedOak Instruments has created a solution.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch your question.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, no. Can you tell us a little bit more about the RedOak Instruments and the solution towards detecting and documenting those traumatic brain injuries?
Okay, well, the way we detect it is by looking at the coordination of your hand. Well, I want to know how well your fingers work together. So very simply, we've got a device which is small, handheld, 3 buttons on it. And what you do is you hold it with your thumb, index, and small fingers. And so when you squeeze and hold this thing, your hand will shake a bit if you're doing a good grip. And in other words, I can literally see the muscle recruitment of your hand, so I can tell if that's normal. And at the same time, when you squeeze this, each of the fingers makes an independent measurement. So I can tell if your fingers are closing at the same time or if they're not closing at the same time. And typically we'll have about a 13 or 15 millisecond jitter between your fingers. That's pretty well normal. If it gets much beyond that, like if you get hit, that can be 80 or 100 milliseconds. And so now when you close your hand, your fingers aren't closing at the same rate as your thumb. You can't pick stuff up. You're clumsy. And that's what we're looking for. How clumsy are you? What is the timing error between your fingers when you try to close your hand or try to pick something up? And on top of that, we measure reaction time. Your reaction time slows when you get hit. Unfortunately, your reaction time also slows if you're thirsty, if you're mad, if you're happy. Any reason practically slows down your reaction time. So simply measuring your reaction time and then trying to determine you're injured based on what your reaction time is alone doesn't work. But if I look at your reaction time in your thumb, your index, and your small finger at the same time, and then look at how much of an error is between them, I can actually measure a very nice factor that's very consistent for head injuries. And so that's how we detect whether or not you're injured, is how clumsy are you.
Wow, no, that's really, really interesting approach to determining that kind of that trauma. And your solution, obviously it's the hardware component, but there's quite a bit of software underlying that as well, right? What does the software show you when somebody performs this type of test?
The software actually allows me to look at these very, very fast times. We make a measurement every millisecond. So on each of your 3 digits. So we're making 3 measurements every millisecond. So that's about 170,000 measurements that we take that go into this test. When we run a test for a minute, we test the right hand for a minute, then test the left hand for a minute, test the right hand for a minute again, and the left hand for a minute again. The second time we test you, instead of just having a command on the screen that says start and stop, we've got something else that pops up in the between of it that basically says, don't change what you're doing. If you're squeezing, keep squeezing. If you're not squeezing, don't start squeezing. And basically what it does is it confuses people. And the idea is to look at what their cognitive reaction time is. How long does it take them to think through, oh, I don't just react to this, I have to make a judgment first. Is this where I squeeze or not? And by looking at the difference in your reaction time and your cognitive reaction time, your recognition versus cognitive, we can also make an interpretation of how well your brain is functioning. So we use software to run our tests and to do the analysis for it, in order to determine coordination. We also look at the coordination between your thumb and your fingers. And so we make several cross plots and we look to see how smooth they are or how much noise is in them. For example, if you've got carpal tunnel, when you look at a cross plot, it makes little rosettes because your fingers are literally vibrating. And so it draws little circles in the cross plot. So we can differentiate carpal tunnel, for example, from a head injury or from peripheral neuropathy due to diabetes, because they all have different patterns.
That's amazing, Bill. That's so cool. So we're seeing some questions coming in from chat, and thank you so much for engaging. Appreciate all the attendees and the questions that you're asking. And it kind of ties into the traction that you've had. So my understanding is that we have FDA 510K approved. Can you talk to us a little bit more about where you are in the FDA process and how much traction you've had in the development of this product?
Yeah, this little gadget, this little number right here, barcode, took us quite a while to get, because the FDA, actually we got our FDA quickly. The problem was then getting us set up as a manufacturing company, get licensed for the government, licensed through the state, then get our GUDID registration. The GUDID. See, this is where the MEs are helping me figure things out.
Thanks, MEs.
To get the proper names for them. But the point is, yeah, we've got all of that taken care of. And so now we were just getting ready to start selling this last February, and then something weird happened, and for some reason we weren't allowed to get into any of the clinics. So we basically have had to wait for COVID to slow down. But it's enabled us to actually modify our software a bit and get a little more robust handle on what we're doing. And so hopefully as things settle down to a dull roar here, we can, as soon as the clinics open up to where they'll actually let people come in and talk to them again, then we hope to go commercial with it. Great.
And more questions coming in. And I think you kind of touched on this when you kind of demoed the product, but is there a reason why you went with 3 buttons versus 10?
Yes. Oh, yes. First off,
can you walk us through that? Yeah, thanks.
Oh, yeah, I'll go through it. It's really actually, it's very simple. When you look at your hand and you grip something with it, when you make a contact with your thumb and your little finger and your index finger, you have 6 degrees of freedom. If you do all 5 fingers, you have 125 degrees of freedom. That's messy. So by using the 3 like this, I cut down the number of variables that are actually involved, but more importantly, the thumb and the index finger are controlled in sensory feedback by a different nerve than the small finger is. And so by doing it with these 3 contacts, I actually can look at how one nerve is working compared to another. And I can actually look how well do they communicate with each other. Because if they don't, you're clumsy again. And so it's again, and also because the median nerve that comes up through your wrist right in through here is the one that you have problems with carpal tunnel. Well, that affects this side of your hand, not this side. This is the ulnar nerve that comes up on the outside. So I can see carpal tunnel that way, which is different from what I'm looking for when I see different patterns for head injuries. So it's just a way of using the human body to my advantage.
Yeah, minimizing the variables and controlling clean data.
Control the variables.
Great, thanks for that question. I appreciate that answer. Before we go into revenue model and market size and things like that, can you tell us a little bit about, I guess this is a little bit of like a competitive analysis conversation, but there are a handful of tests to determine if people are experiencing traumatic brain injury. Can you talk to us a little bit about how this process of determining through your structure, through RedOak instruments, is different from the other tests out there?
We are the only test that you can get right now that's objective, entirely objective. I don't ask you any questions that are used in the analysis other than one. I ask whether you're left or right-handed. And the reason for that is that if you're right-handed, I expect your right hand to be stronger than your left hand by maybe 10 or 15%. If you're left-handed, I expect your 2 hands to be about equal. No, I don't. We live in a right-handed world.
Oh, good yeah.
So that left-handed people are at a disadvantage. They have to use their right hand whether they want to or not. Right-handed people don't have that issue. So that's the only thing I really use from what you tell me. Everything else is an objective measurement. It's based entirely on what we measure, not what you tell us. So you can tell us you feel fine or you don't feel fine, but I don't care. I care only how well you can go through the test. And so it's a way of not using a questionnaire to find out if you're injured or not asking you, how do you feel? I'm going to measure how you feel. I'm going to let your body tell me how you feel. And we're the only ones doing that. Now, the only other way you can get that same information is using a PET, a positron emission tomography. I can't even get the names right. It's a very expensive test. It's not easy to get, but it's about the only one that'll show you the same information that we can get. It's very expensive and takes quite a bit longer than ours. Ours takes about 7 minutes to do the test.
And the PET, about how long does that take generally?
Anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour and a half.
So you're gonna miss half the game like that? No, right?
More than half the game.
we can talk
and you
more.
can use and you can use us in a dugout or in the sideline.
Oh, PET you have to go to a facility for.
Anywhere a laptop can be used, we can be used because we use the power from the laptop.
Right. And then the PET though, you actually have to go to a facility or maybe into the locker room or something?
Oh, you'll have to go to a hospital for that.
Oh, wow. So it's 30-minute test plus all the travel, commute, all that work. Oh, wow.
That's not counting checking into the hospital.
So big swing there on the timeline. And then cost comparison. You said that RedOak Instruments process is less expensive than the PET process. What does that look like comparatively?
We're trying to keep our tests to the point where we could run them in a school at about $5 a test. Right now we're at about 7.5. We're not down as low as I would like to get. Most of our competitors that make any measurements are charging anywhere from 15 to 25. If you go to a hospital, you're going to spend 3,500 or more to get any test run. So
wow.
We're fairly inexpensive. And the only real issue on that is that we're finding out schools don't want to run the tests themselves. Unfortunately, school nurses aren't even allowed to give aspirin anymore. So what they really want is for someone else to do it. And although we haven't worked this into our business model directly, we're trying a beta study up in Montana where we actually have a walk-in clinic where you can make an appointment, come in, and we will test you. And then you can go on back to whatever it was that you were doing. And we're finding that some teams will come in to be baselined. Private individuals will come in and they'll pay up to about $130 just to come in and take the test. So we know it's a cost-effective system. And through some of the other clinical studies we've found out using CPT codes and insurance, we know that Medicare, Medicaid, which are the lowest, will pay about $65 a test. So that we know that we're cost effective. Our costs to run it are quite a bit under what we know that we can sell a test for.
That was great. And that is going to take us into the revenue model conversation. I look forward to diving in deeper with that. But before I do want to close the loop on the questions that are coming in from Q&A, just to make sure that I got this right. It does sound like it's 3 buttons per hardware, but you would do both hands. Do you do them simultaneously, one and then the other?
We don't do them both simultaneously. Okay. I've thought about that many times because I would really be interested to knowing what the timing issues are between the left and right hands. But now you've made a complex system even more complex. And I haven't done it yet. I may, but for now we do each hand separately.
Great. Nope, I think that closed the loop on that. And then more coming in about the FDA approval and notices. Could we, actually we'll probably work on this offline. but we want to make sure that we can actually probably add it into the Q&A section of your offering page on NetCapital to make sure everybody has access to FDA notice of approval and
Well,
scientific references.
I believe our 510K is listed on your documentation.
I thought so too. Yeah, I do want to say I thought that was the case as well. So Richard, we'll go ahead and make sure that you get that information, but we do believe it should be available on netcapital.com if you search RedOak Instruments.
It is a 510K that we've gotten. It's not a PMA. It's nowhere near as difficult because it's a fairly straightforward Class 2 medical device. It's basically a stethoscope.
Yeah.
Well, no, I very seriously, I mean, it measures a physiological change, just like a stethoscope would or a thermometer. How you use it depends on the skills of the doctor. And that's basically what we do. We provide a very straightforward measurement, and then we provide ways of interpreting that measurement so that the doctor can apply it to whatever he needs at the time.
Great. No, that makes sense. That's very comparable to a stethoscope. And before we get into reaction to conferences, we're getting close to about the halfway mark, and I do want to make sure that we still cover revenue model, market size, and a little bit more of competitive advantage. But before we do all that, shameless plug, do remember that you can go directly to netcapital.com, search RedOak Instruments, or go to netcapital.com/companies/RedOak-instruments. You can see the entire offering page. You can look through that FDA 510K. You can also, there's a question and answer section, and of course, you can invest directly into the company from there. So, like my classic halftime show. So now let's make a little bit of a pivot here, and let's talk about the revenue model. How does RedOak Instruments make money?
How do we make money? We actually have two ways of doing it. One is a B2B, and the other one's a B2C. We can sell straight to a business, for example, a hospital or a clinic, chiropractor, acupuncturist, or we can sell the test directly to individuals. Now, that wasn't part of our initial market. That's just something that we found recently that people are interested in doing. The B2B potential is only a little over 1 million businesses in the United States. That's schools, high schools, colleges, clinics, urgent care clinics, EMTs, PTs, chiros, acupuncturists. Acupuncture is actually something that I found really interesting lately because we actually did a publication with an acupuncturist here in Houston where he was telling me over coffee one afternoon that he could make all these great changes in people. And I said, can you measure it? And he says, I don't know. He says, well, let's find out. So we took a whole bunch of patients, and we found by testing them with our equipment before acupuncture and then testing them again afterwards, we found we really can document a physiological change in 74% of the people that he treated.
That's awesome.
Immediately after acupuncture, which really surprised me. So we went on and did quite a study on that and published it. And now we're doing some additional work to see how that works. And that got me interested in chiropractors. And so now I'm working with a couple of chiropractors trying to figure out if we can do the same thing for what they're doing. Now, the reason we wanted to do that is that chiros and acupuncturists have very little information to prove to people that what they're doing works. And so what we wanted to be able to do is say, all right, this treatment is efficacious and this treatment isn't. And here's how we can document that it does or does not work. And that's really what we're really about. We make a measurement, we make a documentation. So any business that wants to improve the health of an individual, for example, PTs and rehab, we can measure people before they start the rehab, and we can measure them again during the rehab and determine, well, you're at an asymptote here. You're not going to get any better. So you might as well stop now because it's not cost effective to keep doing this treatment because you're not making an improvement. Or we can say, gee, they're making good improvement, but they're not back to normal yet. Let's keep going until they level off and don't show any more improvement. So some people would get a longer treatment and some would get a shorter treatment based on evidence. as opposed to just saying, well, everyone gets the same amount of treatment.
And I think that's such an interesting concept. And I'm glad that you went down that route, because I think there is kind of in different demographics, especially, there's a disbelief or kind of a distrust of certain divisions of, let's call it, holistic medicine. And so being able to quantify the value add, that could be a really kind of competitive advantage for these chiropractors and, I think therapists and acupuncturists. That's really interesting.
Yeah, not everything works for everyone. And the point
Right.
is we find out what does work and what doesn't. And we really don't care what the beliefs are, because what we're looking for is physical evidence that it does make a difference.
Yeah, and they can market that. That's really exciting. And then digging a little deeper into the revenue model, how much would it cost to, let's say, rent the device per year? Is there a monthly service fee? Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we're trying to sell it for about, or lease it, however you wish to look at it, for about $5,000 a year. And that does include a monthly service fee that gives you access to our internet. And so what it does is you take a test, you upload it, we process the test, and then send you back a report. And that takes a couple of minutes to do it online. And our servers are HIPAA compliant.
Right.
By doing it this way, the test can't be hidden. Now, this really was due to a military paper that I read about a sergeant who had 30 some odd tests that he took to determine that he was concussed or not. And they kept giving him the test until he passed it. And as soon as he passed it, they still wouldn't let him to go back out with his squad like he wanted to. Soldiers are reverse malingerers. They want to get back out there. They don't want to leave their guys alone, but it's not to their advantage to do so. Because he finally passed the MACE, he now wasn't eligible for the VA help because he wasn't concussed. We don't let you hide test results. If you run a test, we've got the test. And this works in sports, in schools too.
Yeah.
A coach or a trainer can run a test on an individual. And while the test is being looked at by the coach or the trainer, the athletic director can also look at it. All he needs to know is the password to get into your account. And so that you can have multiple people looking at the same data at the same time, but you can't hide the fact that someone's injured.
Good. No,
That's the reason
really
for doing it online. I got aside there. What else was your question?
No, I think that was great. Yeah, price per year, and then maintenance or software costs from a kind of a licensing fee structure. And then you did mention that Medicare would pay $65 a test.
Yeah, we've had.
We're willing to pay between $79 and $129 though, just kind of on their own. Is that right?
Right. Well, we've had Blue Cross Blue Shields give us about $240 something for a test too, on average, of about 6 or 7 tests that we submitted through them. So basically, using the existing CPT codes, we found that we can get reimbursed through insurance. But if you do something like a rehab center where you're price limited because you do a per capita system or a capitated system, we're still cost effective because we're only adding about $750 per test. If you do it's based on the number of tests you run, but basically it'll cost you about $750 a test if you do a large number of tests on your customers. So you gain the information as to how well they're doing. You can limit their treatment if you need to, or extend it. And it's not going to cost you a lot in a capitated system. And in a non-capitated system, you can make money at it.
Oh yeah, no, that's really interesting. More questions coming in, and I want to make sure that I pepper these in. What has been the reaction to your product by those who have seen it at industry conferences, et cetera? What is your product development costs to break even? These are actually a couple of different questions. Let's start with how has it been received in industry conferences?
Strangely. No, I've had some people, I had a couple of doctors corner me once, I think they were general practitioners, and start berating me saying that this can't possibly work and here's why. And so I just ran a test for them and showed them. And the most vociferous of the group that claimed it wouldn't work, only comment after seeing it was, "Oh," and then turned and walked. Because it does do exactly what we say it will do. It shows us patterns of how well your hand is functioning. The problem is it does it too well. We're literally 98% predictive probability of finding injury in your hands. The trick is you've got to know what these different patterns mean in order to use it effectively. And that's going to take training. So we'll need to set up CME classes to teach people how to use it in order for it to be really effective. When we tell them what the patterns mean, they're far more interested in what we're doing than if we just say, "Here's what it does." As soon as they learn that it helps them differentiate in a diagnosis, then they're interested.
And does the current FDA approval allow you to use the software to make those diagnoses, or is that a down the line kind of a process?
Oh, no, FDA doesn't allow us to make any diagnosis. In fact, there's no piece of equipment that exists that the FDA will allow make a decision that this is a concussion. For example, it's like electrocardiogram doesn't make a decision about whether you've had a heart attack or not. It shows you patterns. The doctor makes the decision. We're the same way. We show the patterns. The doctors make the decisions. We do not. And our reports even say that on the bottom, is that we're not making the diagnosis.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. One thing I think would be interesting is, Apple Watch, for example, built out the EKG into their functionality, and they do not make the diagnosis, of course, for heart function, but they will tell you that it's a sinus or a sinus rhythm, right?
That's right. You can say this is characteristic or consistent with a pattern that is described as. That doesn't say you have it. That says it kind of looks like it, but you better go see a doctor.
Yep, that's perfect. I think that's still incredible value add. More of that kind of three-part question here. What is your product development cost and where do you break even?
That's a hard question to ask because it depends on how we're being used, whether we're being used in a school or in a hospital. Mm-hmm. Our products, if we're going to cost someone about $5,000 a year to use this, depending on how they use it, they can make $30,000, $40,000, or they can make nothing. It just depends on how they wish to use it. We're trying to get it cheap enough that schools can use it, that small clinics can use it, because they're the ones who tend to see a lot of these injured people quicker than a hospital. And it doesn't have to be real expensive in order to make those measurements. And so we see no reason to make it that way. We are working on, if you really want it to cost more, we are working on another handset that we intend to use to distinguish Alzheimer's and Parkinson's patients. And it will run
second generation sensor?
Yeah, it'll run about 20K because it has far more sophisticated sensors, because there's additional measurements that we need to make that I cannot make with my present equipment. But for the most part, it's not expensive to use.
Yeah, no, I think that is a difficult one, especially kind of given the stage where you are right now and the rollout being delayed because of the coronavirus. And this actually kind of goes into the future, because I want to dig deeper into that second generation sensor, but I wanted to save it for a little later in the conversation. I feel like it's a more natural flow. But no time like the present, right? So let's flash forward for a moment. What are your marketing plans and sales projections for 2021 and 2022? And how does the second generation sensor system fit into that trajectory?
We are really lucky in our model in that respect. We're here in Houston. Houston has a very large medical center, a lot of schools, but a lot of medical facilities, training facilities. So we don't have to go very far to try lots of different things with lots of different people. And we figured out that with less than 1% of the market in Houston, we can be cash positive in 14 months. And we can actually start turning over a return on investment of 2.1 to 5, depending on how fast we push it. again, it's because it can be used almost anywhere, like a stethoscope. Just if you're in geriatrics, for example, we can monitor the hand coordination of a geriatric individual year to year to year in their physical, and we can actually show you when they're beginning to develop symptoms that we think are consistent with Alzheimer's. Now, we're still doing research on that to prove it, and I really need my other handset to do that, and that won't be available for at least a year. But the point is, measurements like that can be done in many, many fields. It can be used in with diabetics, because peripheral neuropathy that people look out for in their feet can also be detected in the hands. And this is another way of detecting it. And I think we can even get it sooner. It's just a matter of thinking of what people are doing and how they're making their measurements. And we can make them consistently, repeatably, and reproducibly. And I need to stress that by repeatably, I mean that I can make the same measurement twice and get the same answer. Reproducibly, meaning I can give you the equipment and you can make the test and you'll get the same answer I did. It doesn't depend on who's giving the test.
Yeah, no, I think that is really interesting. And kind of staying along that traction and trajectory line, I want to kind of just point out for those who aren't super familiar with the healthcare system, the idea that you already have your CPT codes, that's critically important when it comes to a traction standpoint, in terms of being able to be reimbursed by third-party payers.
Yep.
More of a statement than a question. I just wanted to make sure that everybody had that, because that's a pretty big deal. Okie dokie, we're still doing well. Let's talk about the market size for a little bit for those who are unfamiliar. So you talk about the Houston area market, and you talk about military posts and college and pro sports, hospitals, EMTs, et cetera. How big is that pie when you factor in the entire market?
5% of the Houston market puts us at 15 million a year. And if we go 5% of the national market, it's obscene. I don't like to list the numbers because they just look ridiculous.
I'm gonna push you. I'm gonna push you to do it. I gotta hear it. What
$1.5 billion.
Great. And the reason why I push you is I know we've surveyed our investors, and I imagine potential investors on this line. Some of them do like to hear a specific amount of the market size, and oftentimes people do look for that $1 billion mark. And I want everybody on the line to know that it does meet and exceed that $1 billion mark that some investors look for.
Well, it does it, and it does it quickly.
No, that's perfect. And then, good, more questions coming in. Thanks, team. Do any of the large medical equipment companies offer similar devices? That's going to take me to competitive landscape anyway. So it's like they know where I want to go with this conversation. Thank you. And then how easy is it for one of them to develop a similar product? That's defensibility. What is your competitive advantage? So I'm going to rephrase that collection of questions and ask, what does the competitive landscape look like, and what is your competitive advantage over the other players in the space?
Right now, if we were looking at just concussions and not the other things that we can detect, okay, we look at just concussions. Most of the methods that are used right now are questionnaires. How do you feel? How many fingers am I holding up? With a couple of notable exceptions. MRIs are used on occasion, and CT scans are used, neither one of which are very effective. And then PET. And so our only real competition is PET. Now, having said that, there is another device that's out on the market right now that is being used by a great many schools to determine whether or not their students are concussed. And I don't really want to give its name. I don't wish to denigrate it or pick on them, but the premise is based on what is the reaction time? Is the reaction time slow? That's the only physiological measurement they make. The rest are questions involved. And if you measure just reaction time and looking for it to slow and say, you've got a concussion or you're injured based on that, doesn't work. I did a very extensive study looking at the probability distributions for normal injuries and concussive injuries, and stupid things overlay each other. You really can't tell the difference. And so by looking at the reaction time differences that we do by measuring 3 different reaction times with the thumb and the index finger and the small finger, we can actually tell that there is a increased noise, increased difference when you're injured. And you can't fake it because we're looking for something that's 40 or 50 milliseconds off. You can't control your hands to better than 160 milliseconds. So you can't fake it. And so it's
interesting. You mentioned the PET and the others and how, just kind of everyday differences and how your mood impacts reaction time, or obviously sleep deprivation, strenuous activity, all the things that are going to kind of be inherently related to sports and military and
right.
kind of how do those impact your device and your system for determining mental health?
Well, when people are angry, they tend to be more aggressive with the handset and squeeze harder, but I'm looking for relative measurements. So I don't care how hard or how soft you squeeze. It's irrelevant to me in the measurement. The only issue is if you, I found one kickboxer that we were measuring, and his gym was so hot that both of us were sweating profusely, and he did have trouble hanging on to the equipment. Well, this thing is made so that it's hard to hold, because I want to know how well you can hold it vertically. Mm-hmm. And when you're holding it with just the buttons like that, if your hands are wet and sweating, it's slippery. And so, but we use hand sanitizer. In fact, we've always used it, not because of COVID, but we've used it before because of hand creams. When people put hand creams on their hands, it's difficult to hold on to the equipment.
Yep.
So.
But you're not seeing mood or sleep deprivation, no, or that those don't seem to show up as an impact on your recording.
It does not change it. The differential is what we're looking for in all cases.
Yeah. No, very interesting. And then, of course, there's the time implications of an MRI or CT scan, and the cost implications as well of having to do those measurements. Quite costly, right, pretty much regardless of your third-party payer situation.
A doctor may recommend a PET after seeing our test results, because he'll know then it's reasonable to do one. It's cost effective to do one. So we're not instead of. We're in addition to, we're a screener saying you do or don't need this.
Yeah, one step in front of other potential steps. That sounds
cheap
great.
Step at that.
Yeah, cheap, fast, effective. All really cool, important things when it comes to measuring how people are feeling. I think we did gloss over one in the middle here, defensibility. Can you talk about your kind of intellectual property strategy? Any other defensible, outside of your team and your core processes and the kind of first mover advantage, where else do you find defensibility in your product?
Well, we've got it patented. We're running CIPs on more of the patent, continuation in parts. I need to do more patents, although my lawyers tell me all they are hunting licenses anyway. They don't really stop people from copying you. They just give you a right to chase after them if they do. But having worked in the oil industry, where I worked for a small company and we were ahead of a very large company, and when I talked to the director of that large company about the research that we were doing, his comment was his guys couldn't keep up with me because they didn't know where I was going. So my goal in this to defend is to stay ahead of the competition by pushing stuff out just as fast as we can and improving it just as fast as we can. Hopefully anyone who copies it will always be a step or two behind trying to figure out where we're going next. And that will probably work better than anything.
I do appreciate hearing a founder talk about just good old fashioned, go out there and outcompete. Nothing wrong with that. And then with regards to the patent portfolio, just for the clarity for potential investors, were those patents issued or are they still pending? Or the one that you mentioned?
We've got 7 or 8 that have issued. I've got some more I need to be working on. I haven't worked on them as much lately as I should because I'm lazy, but I need to get back on the patents.
I
It's
doubt that
boring,
wholeheartedly, John.
really
Bill.
boring.
Oh, come on. I love my IP strategy classes. But I do agree with your counsel's interpretation of them. So I think that covers those collection of questions. I want to mark that as approved. And we are getting closer to the end. I'm going to give you a heads up, Bill. I'm old school. I'm going to allow you to have what I call closing remark at the end, which will be your opportunity to remind the participants of why now is the time to go and invest. So I'm giving you a little bit of a heads up there because I like you. But I want to try to fit in one more component here that I had. You mentioned a handful of publications, and I think your research background and the team's research background kind of speaks for itself. But for those who haven't visited the publications and proceedings section of the offering page, can you tell us one or two that you think are just critically important and the kind of the ultimate finding and how that affects RedOak instruments?
The one that was the most fun is the one I did for a university here in Houston, where they gave me a tennis team for 2 seasons. And we were able to measure, it was a women's tennis team. And we were able to measure every week we would test their hands. And then they would go out and do their practice and their competitions, whatever it was. And the next week we'd measure them again. So we got about a year's worth of measurements on every member of this team. And we could see how they progressed through the different trainings. And what we found was that in a couple of cases where an individual wasn't holding the racket quite right, she would develop an issue on her left hand on her backswing. And what I was seeing was her left hand was getting worse in its coordination. And then he would, the trainer would talk to her, manipulate or whatever he was doing, and she'd get better. But then the next week she was getting worse again until he changed the way she was holding the racket. And after that, she never had the problem again. And so it could be used as a training tool, totally independent of everything else, because it shows you a coordination issue that was developed because she was pinching something in her wrist in the process of her swing. And so that turned out to be one of the more interesting side shots of anything that we were measuring. And he also showed me several things that coaches might want to look for in training programs and rehab programs. That was a lot of fun to go out to that university and watch the results.
That's very interesting, Bill. Was that, by any chance, was that the objective screening parameters for training rehabilitation on sports teams? Was it that one, the Clinical Engineering Journal?
The one with Kurish?
With Kurish, yeah, 2015.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and add a link to that description into the chat here if anybody wants to hunt that down, because that sounds like a really interesting read. And this is one of a host of them on the offering page, so I do recommend any potential investors come on into the Net Capital system, review the offering page, and there's a couple other really interesting ones. There's some on PTSD and a military healthcare convention journal, whole bunch of different reads about the application for this hardware and software. So I wanted to add that link there.
We did several for the Texas Brain Injury Association in Austin or San Antonio, which was it? I don't remember. So here in Texas somewhere, city with an A.
Yeah, somewhere in Texas. Okay, well, in the interest of time, I do want to make sure that we respect everybody's schedules here. So last couple of minutes, the finale. Bill, why don't you, actually, before we do that, I'm sorry, I have a little housekeeping before I do closing remarks. Nope, I do closing remarks and then housekeeping. Yep. So Bill, why don't you come on in here and tell the attendees and potential investors why now is the perfect time to go to netcapital.com and invest.
Why now is a good time? We've got everything we need in order. Everything that we were having some slight trouble with last year, we've been working through, and we've got a pretty good handle on it. So the problem now is simply going to be to raise enough money to spread ourselves as fast as possible. We know that one of the issues with any technology is that it's easy to copy once someone shows you it can be done. Well, we've shown people this can be done. People will copy us. The faster we get out and the broader base that we set out, the easier it'll be for us to stay ahead. And we should be able to move fairly quickly because we're small. We're not based on past experiences and say, no, you can't do this or you can't do that. We're only limited by our imagination. And the more people look at what we're doing, the more they like what we're doing. I have yet to find a single doctor who, after getting him to look at what we're doing, will tell me to my face it doesn't work, because it does. Everything that we say it will do, it does, and it does it very cleanly and reproducibly. So we want people to feel comfortable. We can give a good return on their investment. We expect to either have an IPO in a couple of years or maybe have someone interested in buying us. If we're making as much of a wake as I think we're going to develop some interest, and a large company will probably want us to merge or buy us outright. We fit into clinics. Clinics may even want us. So it's now is a good time because it's about to break loose.
Oh, perfect, Bill. And yeah, the big medical device manufacturers certainly could be looking at this as a potential exit opportunity for RedOak. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up our regularly scheduled programming with that. Thank you so much. I just added a link into the chat, which is to the Net Capital YouTube page. As always, this has been recorded and will be uploaded there shortly. Please feel free to review anything that you missed and share it liberally. We want as many people to hear about the good news that is RedOak Instruments as possible. With that being said, thank you so much to our guest, Bill Paske. Thank you so much for joining us and telling us a little bit about RedOak Instruments. And thank you to all the team members behind you helping support this initiative. And I want to thank all of our attendees for coming and listening in to us discuss the good things that are happening at RedOak. So with that being said, thank you to everybody and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks all. Bye now.
Bye.